Okay, we're going to try again and see if it works. So I'm going to find Terry. Okay, so it says no. Okay, so Terry, I've invited you, and I'm hoping you can join us. Oh, and she can, and she can. How wonderful is that? And she looks fabulous. Hello.
Oh, thank you. I love it when people say that's me on days where I choose not to do my hair and I just throw it up. Like, I should not do my hair ever. Oh no, now Sanella's frozen. Okay. I feel like this is perfect. Every time we do something around perfectionism, the technology fails us. So this is probably apropos for the conversation that we usually have around perfectionism, where the universe works with us to be imperfect. Okay.
Tests us. Yeah, and I cannot get my earphones to work. Okay.
Okay. We hear you
Right.
well, though.
Yeah, that's good. I just I had these and I couldn't hear you. And breathe. And
And that is how recovering perfectionists deal with this.
breathe. This is how we deal with unexpected technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Okay, can
Am
you see?
I breaking up at all on your end?
No, am I?
I'm just a little bit curious whether I'm on the right Wi-Fi in my house, but
Okay.
if we're going, let's just keep going.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like having these, but it's still not working. But that's okay. That's okay. Right, so we're going to do this. I wanted to do something else, but oh my God, what
Oh,
did I do?
I didn't know you could do that.
I should not attempt to do anything. Okay, I'll stay away. Right.
Take
You
your
know what?
hands off the device.
And then don't do anything. Don't do anything. Right. Okay, well, we are here a little bit later than we planned, but that's okay. That's all good. And we want to talk about perfectionism.
Yes.
And I love talking about it. Do you like talking about it?
We've been talking about it since the day we met. There's no one I
Yes.
want to talk about it more with than you.
I know.
But I want to add to that even though we have been talking about perfectionism since the day we met, we bonded over perfectionism.
Mm.
In that um, we bonded over our struggle with perfectionism. I want to say that because people actually
Yes.
don't bond over perfectionism.
No.
But you can bond over your collective struggle with perfectionism, which is what we did. Um,
Mm.
but over, I don't, we met in 2016.
Yes.
So since then, we've been talking about it.
Mm.
And over the years, I think for the first several years, I really made the assumption that perfectionism, how it showed up for me, how it felt for me in my world, in my body, was a shared experience since we both resonated with the same work.
Yes.
We both self-identified as being perfectionists. I just assumed that perfectionism was the same for everybody. And then as we really dug into it, and as you started, doing research and developing, a program for us around perfectionism, soon to come out,
Mm.
um, that I realized I'm like, okay, this is actually different for me than it is for you. We were not, and I remember you kept saying you were a perfectionist. I'm like, no, you're not. Because that thing you do, I could never have done that. Like, I don't get that. And so I just didn't see you as a perfectionist, but you declared it for yourself. So I'm like, okay, who am I to say
I have to question.
she's a perfectionist?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I remember that moment when you said to me, like, well, you know, I remember saying, like, you keep saying that you are, but I have a very different experience of that. I was like, okay, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, do you want to shall we start there? Do you want
Yeah.
to talk about how does perfectionism show up for you?
I'm going to answer the question. I know you asked me how does it, and I'm going to
Mm.
answer how did it.
Okay.
That is not to say that I don't still struggle with perfectionism.
Mm.
Um, but I feel like it is so much more muted for me now
Mm.
that I think I would have to do a reassessment about where it's creeping up for me today and where it shows up. It's not as loud and as shouting as it was once.
Mm.
I see the obvious places where it sometimes does, right? But um, it's easier for me to paint the full color picture if I go back to before I knew better.
Yeah. Good.
And if I go back to that time, I think, okay, so from when I was actually not a very young girl, I was chaotic and messy, and my room was a mess, and everything was just, I was not a perfectionist. I did not try to get everything right. I was not necessarily a great student at the beginning of time, but something kicked in around sixth grade, right? When, um, and I don't know what a lot was going on there. Teenage years, parents, were getting divorced. I met a friend who actually paid attention to school and tried really hard at school. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You could also do school that way. Just like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And I'm always, that feels pretty good to get an A. Oh, I'm getting A's. I never got A's before. And like, oh, wow, I'm playing this musical instrument. And oh my gosh, look, when I actually practice it, like I get to the front of the line. I like get to be first chair. So I was having all of these experiences in that time, trying out what it was like to like do things to a higher level better. And
Mm.
of course, you practice, you get better. If you pay attention to things and if you try harder, things generally improve for you. But there was definitely then a tipping point where I went beyond. Of course, I got positive feedback for what a good student I was, how hard I tried, how quickly I got things done, um, how good I was at remembering people's birthdays. People would walk in, oh, your house looks so nice and neat. It doesn't even look like their kids, kids live here. And I was like proud of that.
Yeah.
Like I had two kids, was like trying to hide them like in the closet. Like what was I thinking? Of course I had two toddlers. And I remember saying it to my sister. I'm like, I've organized the house and I'm doing really well. And I was so proud of my parenting. And I'm like, and somebody even said that my house looked like no kids lived there. And my sister said, oh, how sad. And I thought, oh, that's maybe it's not good.
Mm.
And so, slowly, I think once the two kids came, I could not keep up. For me, perfectionism was all about doing the maximum as much
Mm.
as you could and more, always going beyond what people expected so that
Okay.
I would wow them,
Mm.
um, beyond and I would do it quickly. And if it took me a long time and I didn't do it quickly, I just pretended like it
Yeah,
was no
yeah.
problem. And like,
Yes,
oh
yeah.
no, it's no problem at all, right? It was really, I had to not only do things perfect, but I had to make it look effortless
Mm.
or give the
Yes.
impression that it
Yes.
was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
effortless. And it was
Mm.
everything from the house, my work, my
Mm.
appearance. Oh, this old thing, the works. It was, and what it was,
Mm.
it's what
Mm.
I guess I would have originally called, kind of typical or traditional perfectionism, but I'm learning that there maybe isn't one, that it's
Mm.
different for different people. Um, and I know that it didn't look exactly like that for you. It crept up for you other places, but for sure it was all about making sure that I exceeded people's expectations in terms of delivery of me, my kids, my house, my work, everything about my life, and that they were under the impression that it was easy for me.
Mm. Mm.
And I was
Mm.
slowly just it cracking inside because, of course, that is not easy. It is very, very costly.
Mm.
But before we go into that, I want to I think it would be a better conversation if we kind of juxtapose, like, that's what perfectionism looked and felt like for me. But
Mm.
what about you? I know it was a little bit different for you.
Yeah, it's, well, I don't know. I could definitely, I can't remember how, when I took that on, I think I realized at some quite early, maybe around the same. I know I was still in the sort of middle school when I realized that how I am naturally and what other people needed me to be was slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, and I think it was also when I experienced the first hurdles, like, in school. And it was like, now looking back at that, well, I see my kids struggle with stuff, and you don't make a big deal out of it. You sort of, you help them out, you just move them along. But I think there was something about those hurdles in school that then, I think the way it was handled left me a little bit, shit, I really, this is a big deal. Like, one should not have, I think I made up the story that one should not struggle like this. One should not, at school, like, and that translated, like, one should not struggle. There should not be struggle. If you struggle, you are stupid.
And you got that impression from the you were kind of reading that feedback from the environment around you, the
Yeah, and I
reactions
could
of people.
exactly. Yeah, I think
Okay.
similar to, like, you say the divorce, then when you make up stories, like, maybe, I could kind of say, oh yes, my parents did that and that, and maybe that may, let me believe that that wasn't okay. But kids, when you are little, you take little information that you have and you make up a story. And I think that's the point where I made up a story that I'm not clever enough. Because if you struggle, like, you are just, I made up a story
Mm.
that, perfect people, or, like, good students or clever people, they just sort of, they just get it, they always get it. Everything, like, what you were saying earlier, like, everything is effortless. You just, and I think that is probably maybe the origin of that. And that's when I started to trust myself less and to look for the external feedback more, and to kind of say,
Mm.
all right, so this is who I want, who I need to be. I need to be an A student. I need to be, and that's how. And every time I struggled, which is again normal, I would then be very, very hard on myself. So I think the difference between, maybe the way your perfectionism and my perfectionism worked is that my perfectionism came with very strong critical voice,
Right.
almost from the beginning. So it was always that sense of, you know, well, I made up my mind that I wasn't smart enough. So even when I got good grades, which I always did, that was not a proof. That was just, that was despite of my imperfections, not kind of like, not a normal thing. It was just like,
Hmm.
if people knew how much I struggled that I struggled, not how much I struggled, that I struggled, I would have been less worthy,
Mm.
for whatever reason. So therefore, keep it. But then how perfectionism works. Like, you kind of get that sense, I have to be a good student. I have to appear that this is not a problem for me. So that how
Yeah.
that then transpired in my thing. I wouldn't ask for help. Like, I wouldn't. I tried to get things done by myself. Uh,
Totally relate to that one.
exactly, and that's essentially like. And then, um, yeah, I think with perfectionism comes that lack of trust in yourself. So you're just,
Yeah.
and I think for me that the very, I was reflecting on that. I very early I also realized that there is a disconnect. that there is a disconnect between real me and what I was putting out. I
Oh,
knew that
yeah,
there was a gap.
for sure.
And I think that is where most of my struggle with perfectionism came. Like, you know, so when I read Brené's work, so when she said that it was a shield and that you sort of put that burden on yourself, you do what other people expect of you to the level that they expect of you. Then what resonated with me in that picture is that behind that shield, there was another person, there was a real person, and that person wasn't seen. And I think, you know, that is what made me, like, you know, that was that visceral thing. Oh, bloody hell, I want to be seen. I don't want to
Yeah.
wear this shit again
Yeah,
anymore, you know?
it's interesting.
Um,
I also realized that it was a shield, but when I got to that point, like, okay, the person behind there is not seen,
mm,
mine came with, well, yeah, well, okay, well, who would want to see that? That's the messy person. Like, nobody's interested in messy. People don't want to
okay,
see messy.
yeah.
People want to see, somebody who's got her shit together. And so
Mm,
I portrayed myself like somebody who always had her shit together. And, you know, I it's interesting because I didn't hear, now I hear it as I'm speaking that I guess there was a critical voice there, but only once I learned what this concept about perfectionism. There was, that's what I remember you saying when we were doing our work, and you're like, that there's this behind that perfection, there's that constant critical voice. I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And not that I wasn't critical of myself or tough on myself. Clearly I was,
mm,
but I wasn't hearing, or I wasn't in contact with a critical voice. I was ahead of the critical voice.
yes, 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 I remember that. And that is, so yes, so sort of uh, the by doing that, you were kind of outrunning that discomfort of being found out. So you were doing everything you needed to do or should have or could have done in order to get that dopamine of of yes, you're great, wonderful, brilliant,
Yeah.
how amazing,
And
what a great house,
and if I could
and
keep
whatever.
that up, all that
Yes,
appearance, and
yes,
I kept getting all that
yeah,
positive feedback, not only did other people think I was great, but I was then validated. Like, that for me
yes,
was doing a good job. Then I was a good mom, a good
yes,
worker, a good colleague, a good this, a beautiful woman. But
yeah, yeah,
that I was, so I didn't have to be critical of myself.
yes,
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
have to
yeah,
have it. It's, again, there of course were critical voices in the back of my head, but
yeah.
that's not what was driving me. I was like doing all this so that those critical voices never came in, so
Yes,
that I didn't
yes.
have to hear them. And that's why stopping perfectionism felt like a huge risk. Like, I thought it was a,
Mm.
an asset. Like, do you know I went
Yes,
into a
yes,
job
yeah, yeah,
interview
yeah,
and
yeah.
listed it as a strength?
Yeah, yeah, of course we all did. No, but I did as well. Like, I mean,
You
that, you
did.
know,
Oh my God.
I used to work as a career coach in a business school, and that we taught people to say that. Um,
Yeah,
so that
because who
is,
everybody wants to hire a perfectionist,
oh, exactly. Of
but
course
it's
they
not
do.
because you're so great. It's because they can take advantage of
It's,
your false pretenses and your
mm,
willingness to work hard for external validation.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, well said. And I think that is exactly. And I think it's rewarded also in a structured, you know, especially school, it's rewarded, in corporate, it's rewarded up to the point. And I think this is what I see in coaching as well. Like, you know, people get to the point where perfectionism, when you're in control, I think when you are able, perfectionism that you are describing, with oftentimes it's called the what do they call it, the high functioning perfectionism, because
Mm-hmm.
it really makes you focus to achieve, to get that
Yeah,
validation, to do what people need you to do. um, and that works when you're in control of your own, if you are the sole asset and you're in control of your time and your energy, and you ace it. I mean, a lot of high achievers are exactly have those traits, what you describe there is what becomes a problem when you have, when you get kids or when you become a leader where you have to work through people. Then perfectionism of that kind becomes a little bit too constraining, I think,
That's exactly it. That's where it fell apart for me,
yeah,
right? When I had one kid, it got really tough, and when I had two, it was not sustainable, and I
yes,
knew it. And I literally just couldn't. I couldn't let go of anything. Like, okay,
mm-hmm.
Terry, just let the house be messy. Just let, don't worry, don't worry if you don't have hair and makeup done. Don't worry. None of that felt like I could take that risk.
Mm-hmm.
And when I
Mm-hmm.
started the personal development, when I went into my coaching program, is the first time I realized, like, okay, this perfectionism thing, it's kind of tiring. Maybe since I have to do coaching to become a coach, I'll talk about this perfectionism thing. Maybe I'll talk about, I feel like I have control issues. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they were one and the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was then that I started, reading Brené's work and uncovering this perfectionism thing, and I just realized, I'm like, I I can't do this, and I had to start doing like little experiments. Like, could I notice a, all the toys were all over the room, and could I not pick them up? Could I leave them there overnight? Who would even see them while people slept? So no, I mean, but like the thought of going to bed without cleaning up all the toys and putting it behind the cabinet,
Mm-hmm.
like, and so I literally would do like, okay, I'm gonna just leave them out overnight and see if that's okay. Deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
I see this pile of clothes here. I'm gonna walk by it and not clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard.
Yeah.
Um, I remember thinking, like, can I go out without makeup on?
Mm-hmm.
I do it all the time now. But
Yeah.
I mean, then, no, I'm like, can I remember the last day of my coaching program, I'm like, I said to a friend, I'm like, I feel like I need to like show up with my hair up, no makeup, like in my pajamas. And they're
Just
like,
to show the progress.
I'm not sure that's appropriate either. I'm like, yeah, it was like, but I just need to break I'm like, I know what,
Yeah.
I could feel that it was all these little ways
Yes. Yeah.
that were part of this bigger picture that I was constraining myself, that I was grasping on. And it was this desire for control. And, look, when you're young and your parents are getting divorced and you're a teenager and
Mm.
life is like, you, that was, I mean, I guess I could have gone completely the other way. I could have gone off the rails and become a complete rebel
Yep.
and not gone to school and just, kind of spent my
Mm.
days, experimenting with all sorts of crazy things. But I didn't.
Mm.
Lucky for my parents and myself, I went the other way, and I'm like, oh, let me go into this control mechanism, and let me try to be a perfect straight A student, and the first
Mm.
chair, clarinet player in the band, and the model student, and the model this and the model that.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. I've got a couple of questions. So just for everyone who's joining us, we are talking about perfectionism, and perfectionism as as Brené Brown defines perfectionism as a 20-ton shield that we hide behind because we think that we are not good enough. And Terry and I have are recovering perfectionists, and we noticed it the most when we started looking at our families and how we are showing up for them as Terry is describing. So I've got a couple of questions about do you believe in mapping or planning out our day as a mum of 3 young children and then do routine works? That sort of coming from a desire to control and make it perfect. What do you think, Terry?
My immediate answer is yes. I mean, look, some of that is just survival, right?
Mm,
This is like routines, especially when you have a lot going on, when you're, I don't know, even when you're a busy student, or when, you have, you know, three kids and a house
mm,
and yeah, you need schedules, you need routines, because you can't hold all that in there in your head, right? Like,
mm,
there's a practical reason why you want to schedule and routine. I would differentiate this. Like, how do you know whether you're just setting a routine because it's going to be useful and it's going to be helpful and it's going to be practical and it's going to give me support, versus when am I being super controlling and structured? And when
mm,
is it, and that bends into perfectionism. I think when if you can't deviate from that plan, if that plan, because things rarely go to plan, especially with three kids, you have a plan laid out, and then you wake up in the morning and one of them throws up at your feet, and you're like, okay, there goes that plan for the day. You're like, everything changes.
mm,
I think if you can't deviate from that plan, it's going to create friction in your life, right? It's going to create a lot of um, dissatisfaction and a lot of discomfort
mm,
that is not useful. And you have to look at, like, why can't I deviate from that plan? And then the other thing is, if you're creating a plan that because it works for you and it helps you and it's
mm,
supportive for you, great. If you're organizing your life and in the back of your head you're thinking, this will please my teachers, this will please my in-laws, this will please my friends in the mom club, this, that I'll look like the good mom, the good this. So if you're doing it for somebody else's benefit, to look good
mm,
for somebody else, to please somebody else, that's perfectionism,
mm.
versus, setting a schedule and
I need.
organizing yourself because it's, what Brene would call healthy striving. Like, this
Mm,
is, I want to do things well. I want to make sure I get all the things in that I need and the kids need: me time, their time, play time, nap time, you know, all of that. Absolutely. Structure,
mm,
routine. And it
mm,
can feel, I see where the question can come from, right? It can feel very controlling and controlled if I've overly structured my day.
mm, mm.
Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, 100%. I loved routine, especially when my kids were younger, um, because everything depended on me, like, adults, but a lot of time it was me. Um, and I needed I needed to know when things are happening. So when do I have time for things like, nap times you mentioned there. So I think routines are good. I think the key there is that sense of, if a routine doesn't work, um, do you then make up a story that you're not a good enough mum? I think that's the,
Mm,
to me, that is the, if we, whatever we do, and this is like, if I think about perfectionism and how I sort of started walking away from it, because what happens with perfectionism, when we armor up with that, when we carry that, is that you constantly are making up a story about yourself and your intrinsic worth, when what you are trying to do does not work out the way you imagined it, or when you do everything that you thought you should be doing, but then, people do not praise you enough, or people do not value you enough, or people don't. So, when that external validation doesn't arrive, then you kind of go inside and you go, oh gosh, that level of perfect wasn't enough. So what else do I need to do? So then, if you're constantly going back to, it's my fault, I should have done more, I need to do more,
yeah.
then I think we can kind of start thinking, oh, is this about perfectionism? And the answer could be yes. And I'm saying could be, and we need to be curious, because perfectionism is not the answer to everything. But I think, it is it is something that a lot of people do a lot of the time in order to avoid being criticized, in order to avoid feeling like they're not loved enough or lovable enough.
Yeah. Interesting. Even in our answers there, to this question, about routines, I was like going at it from my perfectionism experience of why are you doing the routine? Are you trying to
Yes, yeah,
outrun
yeah, yeah.
judgment and criticism, which is one mechanism around perfectionism, right? We're just trying to avoid any sort of judgment or criticism. So I'm gonna and and you're connecting it to that critical voice again,
Yeah, yeah.
which is what kind of drove you, like that critical voice. If the plan doesn't work, then what happens? Then do I get critical of myself?
Yeah, yeah. Or do other people, you know, criticize you? So yeah, absolutely. So um, we all have our flavor of perfectionism, and this is why it's important that we understand and how it shows up, and what sort of voice it has, and what sort of drive, what's driving it, where are we vulnerable to it, and yeah, I think for me, another thing that was very, I for example know, and definitely was true when I was full on perfectionist, is that I had such high expectation of myself. Actually, if I think about it, I did not care too much about other people, or maybe I kind of blocked that. I think maybe it was so big in my head, my voice of, this needs to be this, the expectations was so self-generated, but I think internalized from everywhere. So um, I think that is definitely something that I experience, that if I start working on something, I would quickly go from, this needs to be a page, a couple of questions, and I could do it in 10 minutes, and then, oh my God, it should be like a full-on workbook with lots of lovely quotes, and best if I could actually provide examples. Do you know what I mean? Like, it suddenly goes into this massive piece of work, for example, where I have to, I even now, that is the sign for me. I'm like, okay, let's go back. Let's
Yeah.
see what's, because that is my inner perfectionist is very, megalomaniac. It's like it has a vision of, like, greatness and excess, and those standards was something that I could never reach for myself. And I think that is how it sort of, that how I caught that's what was painful for me about it, because even when I achieved that, almost instantaneously, that achievement wasn't enough. So like that achievement, like, oh, but but that thing, like, if you just raise about a little bit,
There's
that
always
becomes,
more.
there's always more, and I was generated. So that's I think the key maybe difference between how it showed up for me and you is that you were kind of very clear through school, like, this is what needs, this is what's expected, let me deliver that, let me do it quickly. Whereas I would go internally and create all of that for for
Yeah.
myself, and
This is,
oftentimes unnecessarily, for sure, like at
yeah.
100% unnecessarily,
Yeah, and at a huge cost. I mean, it's just
and at
exhausting
a
to
huge cost.
either way
Yeah,
is very
yeah,
exhausting.
totally.
Um, and what I hear is that, there's this, needing to like do more, and that even when you achieve some measure of success after doing
Mm.
all this stuff, that if it didn't work, or if it didn't have the wow effect you wanted, or you didn't get the grade you wanted, or whatever, the perfectionist mindset is not to say, oh, well, I guess all that work and effort and perfectionism doesn't work. A perfectionist mindset actually says, oh, I know, I wasn't perfect enough.
mm,
I need to double down. And I definitely have that. Like, oh, I did this much practice and I only made it to this, this chair in the in
mm,
the
mm,
in the
mm,
orchestra. So now I need to double down. Used to practice, 20 minutes every day. Now I have to practice an
mm.
hour a day,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It was like I just wasn't perfect enough.
Yeah. And I think this is where it's interesting, and I'm curious, like this is a coach in me. So I'm curious is how do you differentiate now between high achievement and perfectionism?
Yeah. For me, it's back to the question that I told you before. I ask myself who I'm doing it for.
Mm,
Am I sitting here thinking I need to keep iterating on this project, on this work, on this
mm,
email, on the whatever, on the house? Like,
mm,
you have
mm,
guests coming over. Am I lighting yet another candle? Am I,
mm,
am I, and is the thought like, what will they think and see and feel when they come in?
mhm,
Or which is for me perfectionism. That's that external validation. I'm really oriented to that
mm,
other person's validation and judgment.
mm, mm.
Um, if I'm doing it saying, oh, it's going to feel so nice if we have just a couple candles lit, and I'm just going to really enjoy spending time in this room with them visiting here.
Mm.
That's like,
Yeah,
that's,
I noticed the energy. That is like it was different energy when you described because I was kind of listening, and both could be to the external person. Both could be very much like, oh, that sounds like that could be perfectionism, but that could be perfectionism. But the energy that you had by describing that room where you feel nice and they feel nice, that to you feels like okay, this is something uh, about me doing something that I love, feeling nice, and then also making it nice for other people. That does not come from a sense of, oh shit, they're going to think I'm a horrible hostess if I don't have that.
yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we should present, Sanella, you were talking about, you know, you get started on a project and then you think, oh, it should be this, and then images and quotes and
Mm,
examples and all that, and it gets really big. I think we should also presence the fact that for some people, perfectionism shows up as procrastination.
yes,
That
100%.
so
Yeah.
sometimes it looks like I can't stop. I need to work. I need to iterate. It needs to be
Mm,
bigger and
mm,
better, and it's never going to be good
mm.
enough. And for other people, or even for myself, I've recognized it in other moments. There's sort of a paralysis. The
Yeah,
perfectionism causes like I can't even get started.
totally, totally. I think that's definitely one of the behaviors, one of the behaviors that come with perfectionism, because what happens to, and I totally relate as well, because sometimes that expectation would be so big, and then the kind of, and I did not do that consciously at the time, but like, the fact that somebody out there will be disappointed by the level of imperfection that I will deliver, which I haven't even started to do. I mean, like, is this? So I'm in a thinking space, but I would get overwhelmed by the sheer um, I don't know, suddenly that path that looked very kind of like, I do one thing and then the other thing, to get to that level of perfection, of that this is that amazing thing, it would be just like, oh bloody hell, like,
Yeah.
it's overwhelming. And I think overwhelm is definitely then leads, in my case, overwhelm leads to procrastination, and in some ways of um, not just in terms of moving away from it really, for me, it's knowing that I've gone into overwhelm and then just calming that down, naming it, and just to be able to make that first step, scaling it down, not sort of scaring myself with that. So yes, I think that, yeah, that procrastination is, I know a lot of well, some of my clients, like, there was A students, just because they would procrastinate and then cram like lots of studying close to the exam and then ace it. Or if they didn't ace it, then they would be like, well, if only I started earlier, would have been better. But there's
yeah,
perfectionism is, has such a, what I came to admire with all this kind of personal work on perfectionism, how crafty, how sort of like, as soon as you sort of, it makes it, I think it is a protection mechanism. It really is trying to keep our sense of self intact, like, trying to that's why we're doing it, trying to protect that sense that, if you were to see me, you would love even this bit that, I'm afraid to show you.
yeah,
That's what's doing. So yeah, but it's very kind of like, you have to, it evolves, and you have to catch it and kind of recognize it, and it's a
yeah.
practice. I
It's
found, like, that even now for me it's much easier. We are very much, I'm very much connected to how it plays out, so I can catch it easier. But I still find it's something that, it can kind of blindside me, and I go like, oh shit, I've done it again, sort of thing.
absolutely
But
under
it's also,
stress.
yeah,
Under stress,
understands,
I'm
yeah.
right back there. I'm right
Exactly,
back there.
exactly. So that's something to just kind of share. Like, this is it's kind of work that you commit to being seen, you commit to being true to yourself, you commit to, that becomes more important. I think I did have a question for us, like, what motivated you to do the work? What is your why? And I sort of started answering mine, but what was your why for this work?
Like I said, I couldn't, it was not sustainable
Mm,
anymore. And it just like the level of control I was trying to implement in all the areas of my life, like I just couldn't keep up with it. Like,
mm, mm,
and it's sneaky, like you said, because
mm,
it was in fact working for me for many, many years. It made me extremely successful
mm,
in
mm.
terms of all the things I was trying to get up to. So to some extent,
Yeah,
it does
100%. Oh
work,
yeah, yeah, it works.
but it at a cost.
Mm,
And I
mm,
think the cost, so of course there was the energy, there was the fatigue, it just wasn't sustainable. There was that cost. But then when I realized the main thing it was costing me,
mm,
that motivated me to change, was that it was exactly what was interfering in my ability to have deep connection
mm,
to with the people and the things in my life. Everything was
mm,
just a to-do item, an object. Like even,
mm,
like at some point, two kids, you're like, bathe them, feed them, blah, 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 blah. It just was like, how well can I do that in this amount of time and get it done and get them to bed on time? And
mm,
I just was not, I was feeling real dissatisfaction in my life. Like I'm like, I am not meaningfully engaged with the people and
mm,
things around me. It's like I'm doing them all. I'm doing everything. I'm a good mom. I'm doing everything I need to do,
mm,
and I'm
mm.
doing it really well, and it looks very effortless. But I was not, I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. And at the same time, I was holding that question. I was being exposed to this understanding of perfectionism. And I didn't put the two things together at first. I just like, this is what I want to get up to. Okay. And I'm doing this coaching program and we're looking at, perfectionism, like, oh, control and perfectionism. Yeah, I have that too. Okay. And then when I realized that this perfectionism
Mm,
was actually blocking my ability to access deep connection with others
mm,
because I
mm.
wasn't there. I was
Yes.
I was presenting the, the kind of shiny, polished version of me who didn't struggle, who wasn't messy, who didn't suffer,
Mm,
who
mm.
had it all together. And if I had a problem, I also already had a solution that I would share with people.
No.
Like, I mean, I think back to me and I'm like, poor me. I'm like, what was
Mm,
I
mm,
doing?
mm,
And so I think that was my motivation because I'm like, oh, I really very, very much want this connection.
mm,
And in
mm.
fact, when I read in Brené's book, like Daring Greatly, and she said, nobody connects over perfection.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
like, really? Because that's kind of been my MO the whole time. Like, that's how I thought I was trying to get people to like me, I didn't know it. I didn't know it
Me,
when I was
me
doing it. Like
too.
I'm doing this so people like me. I didn't have that thinking. I
No,
just
no,
thought
no. I don't think
this
we
was a good way to
consciously yet.
be.
Mm. Yeah, no, no. And I think that's also like, we don't, like, now we are looking back, and this is why we are sort of, it looks like a nice thread of like, oh, and I've done that, but it's only because, we've done the work and we can go back and connect the dots, but dots are very much like, all over the place, and you don't even know that you have the dots, that you have
Exactly.
dots in there to
How about
connect.
you? What was
Um,
your motivation?
I think for me, it's disconnection. Actually, it was disconnection from myself that I kind of felt I just was not putting uh, the true me out there. So that there was always some sort of yeah. I kind of felt that that It's funny, like I had this huge desire from ever, since I can remember, for people to like me for me, like, like me as I am. And, this is, and if you don't, then, F off, sort of thing. And I had that very strong, and I can kind of, tell you stories of how how that showed up and how I rebelled and kind of tried to, even in when I was working and trying to be perfect, I'll give you an example, like I would show up so everybody's in dark suit, and I would show up in a like a pink, like head to toe pink, just because you have to, I think, looking back, I was really screaming to kind of say, there is me that you do not see, and you want me to be this, and I'm playing the
Yeah.
game, but I'm really annoyed that I'm playing that game. And
Yeah.
so, so
I'm
it was,
doing it, but I don't like it.
I do not like it because there is me that you do not see. So I think that it was that frustration, and also because I think the cost of it for me, that that disconnection even with the work that I was doing. So it stopped it stopped being important to me that you liked my work, that people gave me like uh, A-star reviews on my project. I just did not connect with that. I really did not think that even that is something that I did. It was something that, somebody else did. There was definitely for me that disconnection between the perfectionist me and the real me. And the real me was really kind of blocked with that. And so I
Yeah.
wasn't getting, wasn't kind of internalizing that praise. And I wasn't doing enough. Like, I just felt that if I was to get rid of that, then I could, show more and be more. And I think that for me definitely, is even now why I think it's important.
I just listening to you talk about it, Snella, and hearing you understand that, with Brené's language, that it's this 20-ton shield,
Mm,
and understanding perfectionism as a 20-ton shield between you and the rest of the world, and then also wanting to be seen for who you were,
mm,
really feeling like you're stuck behind
yeah.
this shield, and I guess as you get older, right, as you mature and you
Mm,
start to really know who you are, or you become more aware of who you are,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, I'm now starting to really, I can imagine in your, I don't know what years it was, but like mid to late 20s, people start really figuring out like
Mm,
who I am, what I like, what I want to be up to in this world. And you don't have all the answers for sure, but
mm,
you start to know yes this, no this, and as that happens, right, you're like, okay, I start to know who I am, and you know what, I kind of like her. And when you realize this person that I am is so great, or is worthy of knowing, and I want the world to see this person and not
mm,
whatever else the external world is asking me to show them.
mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That from integration, and I think that's probably what I think we all seek to be one with the one that we show to the world and the one we are,
That they're
so
the
that
same.
we can be sort of whole, if you like. So yeah,
That's
interesting,
beautiful. Yeah,
interesting.
I love it. And still, even in this conversation, I've learned more
I know. I
about you
just it's
every time.
I know, but who would think that we've talked about it quite a lot, and still we've
Yeah.
talked about it for an hour. Well done, us.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So for those of you who are watching, and also if you're watching this later on, we are going to run a session on perfectionism. So the whole month of April is going to be about perfectionism on our grid. It's going to be in lives that we are going to do together, and also we're inviting some really cool guests to talk about perfectionism and nutrition and body image and
Entrepreneurship.
entrepreneurship. And so we're gonna kind of have different conversations where we think perfectionism shows up.
Everywhere.
And then, are we still doing it on the 19th? We're going to figure that out. But anyway, in later on in the month, we are doing the live session. So we're going to facilitate a workshop, a connection session on perfectionism. So you can sign up for that on our website, groundedparents.group.
Yes.
So we would love to see you there. Let's say bye to perfectionism.
Yes, yes. I hope you found some of your motivation, or you're starting to find your motivation to let go of it. Hey, Elizabeth, good to see you here. Thank you for everybody who joined us tonight, and I hope some of this resonated with you, and us sharing our stories and our messy, the messy behind the perfectionist was helpful for you. And we look forward to talking to you guys again.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Terry.
Good night. Bye, Sanella.
Bye.